quite a lot to talk about. What's going on? He survives for how long now?
Look, Sheila, I think we're in the endgame of this of the Keir Starmer premiership. I think the only question is... No, don't worry. I think we're in the end game of the Keir Starmer premiership. I think the only question is quite how many squares on the board we have before we get to the very end. So I think that we were talking earlier. It seemed like Anas Sarwar. Indeed so. But I don't think it's many. And I say that for this reason, which is, look, I mean, when we spoke earlier on, and Anas Sarwar looked like he was going to make the announcement he then gave, there was clearly that moment in politics which always exists when you have a big political figure going over the top and basically saying, who is going to join me? And there's that moment of uncertainty. We saw it with like Geoffrey Howe in 1990 with Margaret Thatcher. We've seen it with James Purnell, for example, with Gordon Brown in 2009. And sometimes that space is filled and sometimes it's unfilled. And it buys you a few moments, a few days, maybe longer. Who knows if you're the incumbent Prime Minister. It looks like, from what we're seeing, from the reaction from the Cabinet and other parts of the Labour Party as well, Angela Rayner, I think a very significant intervention that you just talked about. Lucy Powell as well, his deputy, albeit perhaps not political friend, coming out also in support of Keir Starmer. We also see Wes Streeting perhaps not giving the most full-throated support that he might, but apparently suggesting that Starmer should remain in post. Indeed, I had one Labour person message me saying Wes has bottled it. So you put all of that together, and it looks like it buys Keir Starmer a bit of time. And the Labour Party, look, it is both a deeply kind of internecine, hateful, but also fundamentally quite familial organisation, as we were talking, quite fraternal. And I can completely imagine a sequence of events tonight. I can completely imagine Keir Starmer going in to the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting and it'll all be the banging of the tables. Here we are, here's our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and all of that sort of stuff. And there'll be that moment of togetherness. But what we've got to remember is that Keir Starmer was going into this crisis with very little authority over his party. He's emerging from today with even less authority over his party. And this isn't even the worst of this story, because we know that probably this week we are going to get the documents about Mandelson and his communications and the vetting and all of the WhatsApps and messages between those special advisors. And I can guarantee one thing, we can't say what the contents are going to be, but we can say they're going to be bad. They're going to be embarrassing. So there are lots of moments still to come of profound political peril for the government and for Keir Starmer.
Can I ask you this? And you're right, we don't know yet until they're released, but if there is one scintilla of a sentence or a word in those documents that shows Keir Starmer knew more than he said, that's it.
That's what I mean. So I think that it breaks down into two categories, I think, right, with those documents. One is that the Prime Minister has misled us and misled his MPs, in which case, like you say, Sheila, that's it. Yeah. The other way in which it's fatal is it's just so embarrassing again. It just crystallises again yet another move of this far and no further, which is what we kind of saw last week with the Prime Minister on the floor of the Commons, basically saying what we all knew he knew, but the fact of his saying it seemed to agitate a sufficient number of MPs to lead to the crisis that we're now in.
And what you've just set out there, Lewis, and Aggie come in on this, is because I've covered a lot of these moments over the years, you know, when a Prime Minister has been in peril or a government has been in peril.
So have we, and it's only been the last 2 years.
And your kids. Exactly. And each one of them has their own sort of particular features, don't they? Even though there is some commonality here. What would you say, I'll start with Aggie, this question to both of you. What would you say was the original sin, if you see what I mean? Was it hiring... Winter fuel.
Well, no, two things. Number one, winter fuel, doing that just before all the MPs went off on their summer holidays and had to go and talk to all their constituents who they were meeting for the first time and try and defend that. And number two, although it's actually before this, not having a plan for government. So they all blame this on Sue Gray. But basically getting into government day one and being like, right lads, what's the plan?
With this?
What are we going to do with this? And not having a clear plan
where they find themselves on leadership as well,
grid.
Isn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, lots of people have compared it to 2016 when a load of people resigned from the shadow cabinet after Hilary Benn was sacked, and then no one actually had a plan, so it made Corbyn emboldened at that time. So, yeah, those two things, not having a plan when they came in, not having grid. I mean, the first conference was extraordinary because there was nothing to talk about apart from who'd paid for Keir Starmer's suits.
Look, I would agree with Aggie. As we were saying earlier, Sheila, I think that so much of this ultimately goes back to the vacuum that is Keir Starmer's politics. And Keir Starmer does have some politics. It's a cliche to say he has none. But the politics he has is quite limited. It relates, I think, a lot of the things that are least popular at the moment in politics around kind of international law. There's a reason he's pushed the Chagos deal, for example. These are the things that really, the ECHR, these are things that cut to the quick for Keir Starmer. They're things that go to his core, his political core as a human rights lawyer, a very successful and distinguished one. But his lack of wider politics and his lack of ability to communicate them is ultimately the source of much of this, of much of these problems. And you can find any particular bit of ignition, you can find any particular spark to the whole thing, which this Mandelson thing has obviously become. But if he were going into this as the leader of a politically robust project with a sharp, intellectually sharp sense of what his politics was and what he wanted to be about, he would be able to weather it. But as a result of not having that fundamental diagnosis of politics and project, it means that every little scandal, never mind the big ones like this one, but even the small ones, as Aggie said, whether it's winter fuel, which is a relatively small thing in the grand scheme of things, whether it was the freebie gate, again, something that should be a relatively modest thing, everything gets blown out of all proportion. And you end up in a situation like this where we're looking at 18 months in, a Prime Minister, one of only 4 Labour leaders ever to win a majority in Parliament, on the verge of being pushed out.
And I'm reminded, Aggie, of the post from Hilary Benn that we read out earlier on, which I currently cannot find. Oh, there it is. Now is the time for calm heads and seriousness of purpose. That's why the Prime Minister has my full support. He isn't wrong about that, is he? Because these are incredibly serious times that we live in, both domestically and internationally.
And they'll make the case about bond markets, they'll make the case about Keir Starmer being good on foreign affairs. But as we talked about earlier, that is not a post that talks about Keir Starmer's skill, political wisdom or anything like that.
Or vision.
Or vision. It just talks about the fact that he's the guy in the job right now, so let's just leave him there.
Someone's got to be in charge of the shop.
Well, when I asked Pat McFadden about this yesterday, he said, in terms of a strong argument for the Prime Minister to stay in place, he said, because he's the incumbent, which presumably would mean that Robert Walpole, if he was still alive, would still be Prime Minister. But, look, I'm not sure the fact he's Prime Minister already is necessarily the strongest argument, but it is the argument that's being made. And we should say...
I use that argument every time I have a contract.
Yes, exactly.
I'm the incumbent.
Quite. And look, if he can get to the end of the week, they will just be praying that he can get to the end of the week, get to recess, get to the Prime Minister going to the Munich Security Conference at the end of the week, looking again on the world stage with, Friedrich Merz, with Emmanuel Macron at the Munich conference, and go back to his strong suit and say to Labour MPs, everybody needs to calm down. But like I say, we're not even at the nadir of this story yet, because those documents are a ticking time bomb under Keir Starmer's premiership.
Well, thank you very much indeed to both of you. Aggie Chambray, LBC's Deputy Political Editor, Lewis Goodall of the Newsagents.